Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 12, about the Georgia Constitution. It's Lesson 4, about the Georgia Bill of Rights. In this lesson, you'll learn about the state's Bill of Rights, you'll learn about its similarities to the National Bill of Rights, and you'll learn about differences that it has from the National Bill of Rights. Let's begin by talking generally about the Constitution of the state of Georgia. Georgia has actually had more state constitutions than any other state during its history. Georgia is on its 10th constitution since it became an independent country in 1777. It then had a new constitution when it joined the Union. After the Yazoo land scandal, which we talked about previously in this unit, it had another new constitution. When it joined the Confederacy, it created a new constitution. After it lost the Civil War, it tried to create a new constitution to reconcile itself with the North that it had been forced to rejoin with. But that didn't work. They ended up being occupied by military troops from the North. And so in 1868, another new constitution was written called the Reconstruction Constitution to fit the ideals of what the occupying Northern armies wanted. It wasn't until after those armies left that then the citizens of Georgia, a majority of them, could put the kind of constitution in place that they wanted, which became known as the Redeemer or Restoration Constitution. Then in 1945, that constitution was reformed to bring it up to modern times. In 1976, they decided that that reformed constitution was no longer good, but they weren't quite sure what to do permanently to fix it, so an interim constitution was made. But they didn't really like it, so they immediately set about working on yet another new one, which was finally put in place in 1983. It's sometimes described as a bureaucratic constitution because it has detailed stuff in it to kind of guide the state government in the functioning in the functions that it's supposed to do. Looking at the government as you would look at as a bureaucracy. Remember, we talked about that sort of thing earlier in the course. A hierarchical organization where they're worried about rules and not getting in trouble, things like that. The newest Constitution has some of those sorts of feelings and features to it. Well, that 1983 Constitution is still in effect. So it's the one that we're going to be spending time in this unit talking about as you learn about the things you need to know to fulfill the state constitutional requirement. That 1983 Constitution that's still in effect is divided up into 11 articles listed here. Now, you may recall from when we talked about articles in a constitution, when we talked about the United States Constitution, a way to think about these articles is like chapters in a book, each of them addressing a different part of the plot or a different part of the state government. We'll begin in this lesson to talk about the first of these articles, the Bill of Rights. Now, why would a state constitution begin with a Bill of Rights? This is actually a fairly common thing for state constitutions to do. Now, the reason that that may seem curious is you may remember when we learned about the National Bill of Rights, it was attached at the end of the United States Constitution. It was an afterthought. While the creation of the state constitution here in Georgia, it was the first thought to create a Bill of Rights. Now, why would that be? Well, the reasoning can be seen in this quote from James Madison that we've seen previously in the course. He's talking about the difference in power between the national government and state governments. The federal government, which binds the states together, has powers which he described as few and defined, while the powers residing in the state governments, he said, are numerous and indefinite. It's this idea that while the national government only has a few powers, the states have basically all power. This kind of view was confirmed by Alexander Hamilton, another one of the founding fathers, in a quote that again we've seen previously in this course. He talked about that in the first formation of government, in other words, when the states were created after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, every power of the community was given to them, except the inalienable rights that we have. In other words, these states were imbued with great, great power. And we can see that in the Georgia Constitution itself. In Article 3, something that we'll get to in more detail in a later lesson, it says that the government of Georgia shall have power to make all laws which it shall deem necessary and proper for the welfare of the state. Well, this general principle that states have any powers they want to do just about anything they want is called the police power. We've talked about this previously in the course. This is the power given to the states by the people when they create a state government to bring order, safety, and security to the people's lives. And that's exactly why this power was given to the state government here in Georgia. Again, we can go back to this quote from Article 3, where it says that the government of the state of Georgia will have power to make all laws that are not inconsistent with the Constitution. Now, notice in that, though, even as it says that they have power to make all laws, it puts a limiting factor on it. They can make all laws except they violate the Constitution of the state or the United States. So what happens is the state governments, like in the Georgia Constitution, what they're really claiming is that they have all powers to do anything they want, except those powers which are denied to them. Now, this is the opposite of the national government. Or the way the national government was set up was that the government would be given a few specific powers, and if the power they were claiming wasn't on that list of powers that they were given, then it was assumed that they did not have it. It's the opposite for the state government. We assume that they have all powers unless there's something specifically denying them. So if you're creating a government which is presumptively all-powerful, except what restrictions you put on it, yet you are also concerned about that government in some way abusing their power, which of course is something that Georgia would be concerned about because of the historical problem of the Yazoo land scandal. Remember, just shortly after becoming an independent country and then a state of the United States, they had one of the most corrupt scandals in American history, where just about every member of the government was being bribed. Well, if that's the kind of thing you're worried about corruption in your government, but you're essentially handing your government all power, probably the first thing you want to do is start restricting that power, letting that otherwise all-powerful government know there are certain things it is not going to be allowed to do. This then explains why the Bill of Rights is what the Constitution of Georgia leads with. So a way to think about this is that the Georgia Constitution begins with a list of powers that are denied to the state government. There's this presumption, because it's a state, that it has the police power to do just about everything. So they're going to get right off the bat with a list of things that the state government is specifically prohibited from doing. And that is what a Bill of Rights is called, whether it's beginning the Georgia Constitution or added as amendments to the end of the United States Constitution. A Bill of Rights is a list of things that the government that it's attached to is not going to be allowed to do. Well, this list of things that the government of Georgia isn't allowed to do because of the Bill of Rights added to the Georgia Constitution, or I should say beginning the Georgia Constitution, that list is in many ways similar to the list of things that the national government isn't allowed to do in the National Bill of Rights. Let me give you one specific example. The Bill of Rights of the state of Georgia starts off saying that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property except by due process of law. This is almost word for word like the two due process clauses in the national Constitution. Remember that there's one in the Fifth Amendment applying to the national government and one in the 14th Amendment applying to the states. This is something we learned about in a previous lesson, in previous couple of lessons in this course. Well, the state constitution also has its own Bill of Rights, functioning in basically the same way, saying that a state can't take these things away from you without going through proper legal procedures to do it. Well, following this guarantee of due process, the Bill of Rights for the state of Georgia goes on to list a bunch of other rights that people have in Georgia. And you'll notice that for the most part, these are the same rights that are protected by the United States Constitution, primarily in the Bill of Rights. Things like equal protection, which is actually in the 14th Amendment, but not in the Bill of Rights. But it's one of those things that, yes, is found in the national Constitution, and here it is in the state Constitution also. Then we've got freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms, trial by jury, no unreasonable searches or seizures, the right to counsel, no cruel or unusual punishment, etc., etc., etc. which are included in the Georgia Bill of Rights, which are all included in the National Bill of Rights also. So for the most part, the Georgia Bill of Rights is a collection of the same sorts of things that the National Bill of Rights restricts. Just the National Bill of Rights is telling the national government it can't do these things, and the Georgia Bill of Rights is telling the Georgia government that they can't do these things. Now, the Georgia Bill of Rights, even though it's actually very similar to the National Bill of Rights, is also different from the National Bill of Rights in some important ways. In particular, it's important that it explicitly protects some rights that are not protected at the national level. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things that the Georgia Bill of Rights specifically says is that you can't be imprisoned for debt in the state of Georgia. Now, it should be obvious to you because of us talking about how the state of Georgia was founded as a debtor's colony, why that would be included in there. But it is not included in the National Bill of Rights. Theoretically, I guess Congress could pass a law requiring people to go to prison for some reason because of some sort of debt, and it would not be prohibited by the United States Constitution. But this legislature of the state of Georgia passing that kind of law is prohibited by the Georgia Constitution. Another example is this rather remarkable right included in the Georgia Bill of Rights. It says that fishing and hunting are a constitutional right. Now, they're a constitutional right that allows for management and regulation of those things as a public good by the state government, but the state government can't stop you ultimately from ever doing these things. While they may be able to require, say, a fishing license or whatever, they can't just ban people from fishing. That would be a violation of this passage in the state constitution. Now, believe it or not, even though this is a wonderful amendment that shows us something about the character and cultural values of the state of Georgia, it is not that highly unusual in our country. This map shows you the states in the United States that also list in their state constitutions a right to hunting and fishing. They are shown in red. Now, there's a couple other states that have a right to fishing, though not hunting, and then several others that have legislation pending that could add them as states that have a right to hunting or fishing. But the thing to notice here is that this right in the Georgia Constitution isn't as strange as we might think. It's actually fairly common around the country. The final thing that I want to mention that's included in the Georgia Bill of Rights is this passage, where it says that the enumeration of certain rights in this Constitution should not be construed as denying to the people any other inherent rights that they have. This is very similar to the 9th Amendment in the United States Constitution, and it embraces the idea of unenumerated rights. It's basically telling the citizens of the state of Georgia that, yeah, you may have rights beyond what we listed here, which means there's going to be things that the Georgia government doesn't have power to do to you. But notice what it adds here at the end. It says inherent rights which they may have hitherto enjoyed. So they're not looking for the invention of new rights. They're looking for rights that have been historically respected, even though they weren't necessarily listed in the state constitution. All right, let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, what is in Article 1 of the Georgia Constitution? Is that where we find the amendment process, or educational policies, or a Bill of Rights, or an election processes? Article 1 of the state constitution is a Bill of Rights. What is in both the National and Georgia Bill of Rights? Is there something in both of them about truth being a defense against libel, or about no debt imprisonment? Or is there something in both of them about the right to hunting and fishing? Or is there something in both of them about the right to due process? The thing that's common to both of them is the right to due process. Those other three are things that are in the Georgia Constitution, but not in the National Constitution. What Georgia right is not a national right? Is it freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, right to hunting and fishing, or the right to due process? Hunting and fishing is a Georgia right, not a right in the National Bill of Rights. All right, that completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 12, will be Lesson 5, about Georgia government structure.